Chris Hensley is a registered representative of Cambridge Investment Research, Inc., a broker-dealer member of FINRA SIPC, investment advisor representative of Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, Inc., a registered investment advisor. Cambridge and Houston First Financial Group are not affiliated.
The Houston Midtown chapter of the Society for Financial Awareness presents Money Matters with your host, Christopher Hensley.
Good morning, everybody. You're listening to KPFT Houston Money Matters. I'm Chris Hensley. The time is now 10 a.m. Got a great show for you today. Money has the power to destroy, but it can also be an incredibly effective tool for social change. Impact investing, the support of social and environmental projects with a financial return, has become a hot topic on the global stage, poised to eclipse traditional aid by 10 times in the next decade. And it has the potential to completely restructure the global economy, making social and environmental responsibility integral to how we move money through society rather than an afterthought. Our guest today is Morgan Simon. She will be discussing her book, Real Impact, The New Economics of Social Change. So please keep listening. Stay tuned. She will be joining us very, very shortly to do a deep dive into this book. But as you know, if you are a longtime listener, we always reserve the first few moments of the show just to kind of tell you a little bit about what's going on in the Houston and Gulf Coast region when it comes to financial literacy. So just a couple of announcements quickly, as I do want to spend as much time with Morgan as we can. As you know, we have been, if you've been listening to this show, we've been ramping up for Houston Money Week 2018. This is an event that takes place in the month of April. Used to be a week long, and that's where it got the name Houston Money Week, but it's actually so big now, and we've had partners and different groups join the initiative that it's about a month long of activities during National Financial Literacy Month, which is April, where we provide free financial literacy classes for the Houston community and all different types of topics. It is in April, so we have partners who are nonprofits that are participating in the VITA program, so that would be free tax preparation for low to moderate income. We have banks participating, doing community reinvestment work. We have credit counseling companies. We have local nonprofit, local government, city government participating as well. And so if you're interested in finding out more about Houston Money Week, you can visit the website houstonmoneyweek.org. I am on the leadership committee, and we're going to meet next week, but the week after that, we're having a partnership meeting for groups that are partners of this citywide initiative. Every year it has grown, and we've seen more and more partners get involved, bringing financial literacy out to the community. So if you are interested in attending, I would get in touch with Houston Money Week leadership through the website, and we always would invite you to come out to a meeting. With that, just one quick announcement. We are going to have Wade Fowl is going to be on the show on December 8th. He has a new book out that we will be discussing with him as well. And so stay tuned for that. That is coming up very, very shortly. And with that, let's go ahead and get Morgan on the line here. Morgan,
Thank you so much for having me.
Excellent. You can hear me there.
Absolutely.
Good. Well, thank you. And I kind of start the show the same way. I like to share your bio with listeners just so that they can get to know you a little bit better. And now you are a widely recognized leader in the impact investment who builds bridges between finance and social justice. Over the past 17 years, you have influenced over $150 billion from high net worth individuals, foundations, and endowments. You support Pi Investments and the Libra Foundation, and also a co-founder and chair of the nonprofit Transform Finance. Morgan, once again, thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you.
Could you share something about yourself, maybe outside of the bio, that we don't know about?
Well, I feel very fortunate in my position as impact investor and educator to come from a fine family line. So my mother was an education investor and really learned some of the tricks of the trade from her. And then my father is a rock star. So he's Screen Scott Simon of Sha Na Na.
Oh, wow.
Since 1968. So I think a couple things. One is sort of knowing the power of entertainment and the way that can attract attention to critical social issues. And the importance of, when you're talking about a new topic, to make it exciting and engaging, because that's what really brings people to the party.
Absolutely. Okay, so now I have the image of Sha Na Na in my head for the rest of the day. So that's
right. So just crisscross that with an education investor.
Exactly.
Here I am.
Exactly. Not a bad thing. Okay, so let's dive right into it. The book, Real Impact. Why did you write this book?
Sure. I wrote this book because I feel like we are at such critical moment in human history, and certainly the people of Houston know this as much as anybody else, that the impacts of extreme weather, of climate change, of inequality, of so many challenges that we've had that require really massive shifts in the role of economies to change the nature of the planet. So I felt like there was this great opportunity to educate people and invite them to be part of this growing movement, that it's great to do philanthropy, and charity does lots of fantastic work in solving immediate needs. But hopefully, if we can build an economy that is consistently supporting people on the planet, then we don't need to clean up its mistakes with charity quite as much, right? That we could have an economy that serves human interests from the beginning. And changing the way that we invest, the same way that we think about how we spend our money or even how we vote, is a huge part of that.
So I love it. I love it. This is we're going to talk about this here in a moment, but where activism meets finance, huge topic for us here. You have been a social justice activist nearly all your life. How did you come to dedicate your career to impact investing?
So I have played a number of roles across the social sector in the kind of initial half of my career, from case managing homeless families in downtown LA to working with youth, predominantly immigrant youth, through an organization called Para los Niños in downtown Los Angeles. Worked for the UN in Honduras, spent some time in Sierra Leone, had really kind of crossed the gamut in terms of social change activities. And, guess what? I think like a lot of people who've done social work start feeling like we kept losing, right? That there's so much important work to do. But if the predominant work of the economy is working against human interests, it's very hard to try to sort of clean it up afterwards with charitable activity. And I started to really think in terms of activism and how to be most effective. How about we take on the root of problems by changing the way the economy works, whether that's changing the quality of jobs and people's access to a living wage and healthcare, or thinking about alternative sources of energy, or essentially opportunities for us to really kind of shift some of the economic engines in a way that can serve people. And, you'll notice, as you read in my bio, right, the opportunity to influence billions, that in the nonprofit sector, sometimes we're forced to think very small. And working in the world of finance enables you to really think big about opportunities to make changes at scale. And I know sometimes that can feel hard and distant, as individuals, or we may not have $1 million in our bank accounts, but we're all connected to institutions that do, right? So I often refer to Americans as accidental billionaires, that we all have connections to moneyed institutions if we just sort of dig in and look at where we have those leverage points, whether it's your alma mater and seeing how your donation's being spent, or where you bank, or any number of different institutions.
I love that. And you said quite a bit there, but being able to make those changes on scale, I like the idea of accidental billionaires, where we do have the access through kind of voting dollars to make some of these choices there. What do you say to activists who are skeptical of finance?
I would say that a good activist needs to use every tool that's available to them. And just the same way that, tools can be used in good and bad ways, right? When you think about something like a knife that can be used to harm people or cut a birthday cake, that it's really how you use a tool that makes a difference. And that if you're interested in making big scale change, you just can't afford to ignore finance. Have to take advantage of the opportunities that it can essentially afford to, whether support affordable housing, healthy food access. Practically any social issue you can think of is going to have some type of financial issue behind it that you can address.
I agree. Money is such a wide-reaching topic that there's almost any subject there is a financial aspect to it. Now, in your book, you caution that impact investing is at a turning point. What makes you believe that?
So one is that it is growing rapidly, that we're at a moment where 1 in every $8 is invested in some type of socially screened instrument. So a lot of people don't even know that they may have some social investing in their portfolio, but do, which is great. And then just last year, JP Morgan reported $119 billion going into investments that are proactively looking to do some social good. So it might be supporting low-income housing, renewable energy, quality jobs, et cetera. Now, what's interesting is that means at this moment, if you go to your financial advisor and say, I heard about this social investing trend on the radio, and I think I might like some of those in my portfolio, it's really hard to sort of know, is that impact real? How do I make sure that it's not just what sometimes people refer to as greenwashing, of saying that something is doing social good, but is not? And making sure to kind of ask the deeper questions to make sure that impact feels real to you, whatever your value set might be.
So I love that. As a financial advisor, I remember funds coming out that were, quote, quote, socially responsible investments, and seeing that as kind of a seed and then watching it grow. You just said that $119 billion of social good funds from Chase or from JP Morgan, that is a lot of money. You also, in the book, you point out that not all impact investing projects are inherently good. Can you share an example of a project that went awry?
Sure. So one of the projects that I think about sometimes is in the south of Mexico, there was an attempt to create Latin America's largest wind farm, and it was in an indigenous area. The idea was that you could create local job development and economic development while having the largest source of wind energy and help kind of balance out Mexico's economy, which is very fossil fuel dependent. So this sounded like a great idea to everyone. They're projecting high returns for investors, over $500 million invested. And it was a great idea to everyone except the people who lived there. And it turned out that local residents who mostly speak indigenous languages were asked to sign contracts in Spanish, so didn't always know what they were signing. We're signing over 12,000 hectares of land at less than $50. Which was just an incredible act of robbery. And as citizens started to figure this out, they put up roadblocks and essentially stopped the project, which some could call a community victory, but was also a huge loss for the country in terms of not having access to renewable energy, a huge loss to investors who largely lost their shirts, and could have been so easily avoided if there had just been more care to make sure that local people got to play a part of that economic story, right? So one of the things we often look for in investing is that in any environmental investing, there's always a social story behind it. How do the people get treated? What are the land rights that are involved? And that can be from wind to hydroelectric to any number of different types of investments. And essentially, if you're able to get a community license to operate, you're much more likely to be financially successful as well. So it really does require kind of taking that 360 look, making sure that all parties are being treated fairly in the transaction.
So I love that. You mentioned specifically when we talk about environmental issues or social good issues, that there's that social story behind it. And I think people sometimes will get caught up in that. But you said that it is important to do that 360 look, or what we call due diligence, which any investment, it's really doing your homework and making sure it is what it seems to be.
That's right. And I think it's that social risk is a form of financial risk. Right, that does have material impact in the same way the environment does, and that's what's been, really interesting to see as an industry development over the last decade. That, for instance, insurance agencies like Swiss Re won't insure a company that doesn't have a plan for climate change. And this is not an environmental decision. This is a strictly business decision, saying we're concerned that companies that don't prepare adequately for the future might get left behind. So you're seeing a lot of really strong alignment between social and environmental practices and financial outcomes as well.
So you had a real good example there of kind of the bad apples, but let's sidestep and talk about the positive. I know you have some favorite stories where you've seen impact investing actually work and really make positive social impact for the investors. Can you share one of those stories with us?
Sure. So one I should note is actually the flip side of that story I told before, which is that community members in Mexico came together and said, we get it. We're not against wind energy. We just want to make sure that we continue to have control of our land and more economic participation, and started planning to create their own wind farm and to create an opportunities for investors to be able to support that. But then to have the proceeds from the project support a pension fund for elders. Because a lot of people wind up migrating from the community because they can't support their grandparents, and they might be very happy to stay at home if they knew that there were some financial resources available. So it's an interesting kind of alternative model to be able to have financial value for investors, but then also be able to support local communities. I'm really thrilled to say, and part of the reflection of that $119 billion number from JP Morgan, that there are so many opportunities out there across all different asset classes. So whether it's just thinking about where your money is spending the night at the bank, or private debt funds, or mutual funds, or ETFs, real estate, right, that there's opportunities to really incorporate social and environmental impact into all investments.
I love it. Well, so if somebody's looking to invest, what do investors need to keep in mind to make sure that their projects achieve real impact?
Sure. So I think some of the tips to think about is just to keep asking questions. That's a very basic, to make sure that the people promoting the project have really thought through the social and environmental factors. One of the criteria that I tend to use is the project non-extractive, right? Did I make sure to contribute more to that community than I was taking back out, for example? And in general, some of the principles that we use to evaluate social impact are collected, and case studies have been put out by Transform Finance, which is a nonprofit organization at transformfinance.org. So that's one resource I would direct people to who are interested in thinking more about how to be really diligent evaluators of social impact.
What other things do people need to think about when they're looking at investing with impact investing?
Sure. So I think first and foremost, and I would say that, certainly every case is individual, and to talk to your financial advisor, that the fundamental principles still apply of really figuring out what is the right return that you need for your family, what's the risk tolerance that you have, and therefore what are the products that are going to best fit it. But I think the really good news is that because there's such a diversity of products out there, whatever your appetite is, it can be found. And the one thing that I would just warn you, if you go to your financial advisor and you say, hey, I heard about this social investing thing, where do I get started? And they say, oh, you don't want to do that. We're not sure what the returns are, or there can sometimes be hesitancy, which is more based on the fact that that advisor may just not know about them. And as they say sometimes in money management, no one gets fired for buying General Electric, that there can sometimes be a reluctance to invest in things they're less familiar with. And what tends to happen is that people then either have to invite their advisor to go on a learning journey with them and get educated about the opportunities, or they can choose to replace their advisor, right? And knowing that there's a number of networks like the First Affirmative Financial Network, which are advisors that are explicitly focused on social and environmental impact and can help achieve the returns and the risk profile that a particular investor might be looking for. But I'm sorry, I was just going to add, separate, knowing that, some listeners may have financial advisors, some may be managing their own money. The simplest step, the kind of first step people can always take is just to think about where they're banking, right? That we often make a lot of great choices as consumers. We're buying organic milk, cage-free eggs, but we don't necessarily know where our money spent the night. And if you look at the National Registry of Community Development Financial Institutions and community banks, there's lots of banks where you can really get that transparency on where your money's being held and that it's supporting whether affordable housing in your community or local business, but opportunities to kind of keep your money much closer to home.
I would just piggyback off of that when it comes to the credit unions and community banks through Houston Money Week, what I was mentioning earlier at the beginning of the show. We do a lot of work with the credit unions, and typically if you need to get a loan, the decision is left up to a group of your peers, as opposed to if you walk into a kind of out-of-the-box major top 3 bank where it's just purely credit score driven, and so that's there is some flexibility with the community banks that is really pretty neat there. What have I forgot to ask you that you want to let listeners know about this book?
Well, first and foremost, read it and enjoy it. Is certainly the best I can offer. That's really kind of the synthesis of the last 17 years of my learning in the field, and was just very exciting to be able to share that with the broader world. And mostly I would just say to think of one thing you can do to get started, whether it's that you want to talk to your financial advisor, whether you want to go to Money Week, or it sounds like Money Month might be the more apt name at this point, and connect with some of those credit unions, but see if, there's some way that you can, before the end of the year, start moving some of your money in the right direction towards the values that you care about.
What's really eye-opening to me as a financial advisor, I mentioned earlier, social responsible funds, and I've seen them start in the early 90s and then kind of grow, and we'll have wholesalers from these companies reach out, but from after being exposed to your book and what you're telling me, there is a whole bunch more out there. And so I know it's exactly what you mentioned earlier, is that people will get kind of maybe used to a basket and they don't want to go outside of that. But it sounds like this network, you mentioned the first, that there's an entire network of socially conscious funds out there outside of the ones that wholesalers are reaching out to financial advisors with. And so this really kind of is eye-opening in the sense that there's a bunch more out there.
Absolutely. There's so much infrastructure for people to be able to jump in. And I think the thing that we always have to remember, sometimes we toss our money over to a financial advisor or to a bank, and we feel like it's not our money anymore, right? And that while it's great to trust people around you, it's important at times to articulate this money is an expression of value for me and my family, and I want to make sure it's doing things in the world that I can be really proud of. And similarly, when you donate money to your alma mater, right, asking your alma mater, I'm happy to donate, but where are those dollars being invested? Are they in a way that's representing the values of my school and of that community? Or if I'm a teacher and I'm invested in the pension fund, or a fireman or policeman or woman, of course, that all of these groups that have retirement funds have an economic voice. And the fact that they represent you and your money means that you have the opportunity to have a say in how those are managed.
Now, we are kind of bumping towards the end of the show, but can you tell us a little bit more about the nonprofit group, the Transform Finance Investor Network that you launched, or that was launched back in 2014? Can you tell us a little bit more about that? What is that about?
Sure. So that's a network that launched at the White House, and it essentially brings together investors. It's, I think, around $2.5 billion at this moment. And it's essentially investors who have said, I care about social justice and I want that to be incorporated into my investment approach. And they meet on a monthly webinar to discuss different approaches to investing, to learn about different deals. It's all educational in nature, but it's an opportunity to connect with other like-minded investors. And there's more information on that at transformfinance.org. They also run trainings for more community-oriented groups that are looking to engage in impact investment, want to learn a bit more about it, might not know much about finance, but see how it could be helpful to their particular social issue. And that next one is coming up December 8th through 10th in New York. So lots of activity in building that bridge between finance and social justice.
So that's right around the corner, December 8th and 10th. That's not too far away.
That's right.
Well, excellent. Well, I am learning more about this fantastic topic. For listeners who would like to find out more, you can get a copy of the book Real Impact. You can also find out more about Morgan and the website is morgansimon.com. Is that
That's correct.
Oh, awesome. Oh, perfect. And so, Morgan, we are right here at the end of the show. For listeners, if you're driving right now, you don't have to grab a pen or stop the car, because we are going to have that listed on the podcast notes as well. Any parting thoughts for listeners?
Just thank you for the opportunity to be here and to really think about what might be that one thing that you can do before the end of the year, and that I hope you enjoy the book.
Absolutely. Morgan, thank you so much. Have a great weekend.
All right. Thank you. You too.
And you have been listening
Bye.
to KPFT Houston.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of Money Matters Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, visit us on the web at www.moneymatterspodcast.com. Drop us a line on SpeakPipe on the right-hand corner. It will receive any voicemails, questions, thoughts, concerns that you have about the show. In addition to this, we recently launched a Patreon campaign. Click on the Donate Now tab to hit the tip jar and find out what Patreon's campaign is all about.